Enjoy the story, everyone. Sophia Bennett never imagined she'd sell her freedom for a check. But there she was, sitting in an Italian leather chair on the 47th floor of a Manhattan skyscraper, staring at a contract that looked like it had been written by someone without a heart. The room smelled of polished wood and bitter coffee. The silence was so heavy she could hear her own breathing, quick, uneven, as if her body knew this was a trap before her mind would admit it. Alexander Hawthorne sat across the table. He didn't look at her directly. His dark green eyes, almost black under that cold light, scanned the papers with the same indifference someone would use reviewing a financial report. He wore an impeccable charcoal gray suit, black tie, dark hair slicked back with surgical precision. Everything about him screamed control, power, distance. Sophia clasped her hands in her lap, feeling her nails press into her skin. She wore the only decent dress she owned, navy blue, simple, with a small tear in the hem she'd hastily sewn up the night before. Her shoes were worn, her lipstick smudged. She knew she looked exactly like what she was. Desperate. "Read it again if you need to," Alexander said, without looking up. His voice was deep, calm, almost monotone, as if he were offering tea, not her life, in exchange for an heir. Sophia swallowed hard and forced her eyes to go over the text again. The words danced on the page, jumbled by exhaustion and panic. Party B agrees to enter into legal matrimony with Party A for a period of 12 months with the sole purpose of conceiving and delivering a biological heir. Following the birth of the child, Party B relinquishes all parental, marital, and future financial rights, except for the agreed compensation of $500,000. Wuxuan enough to pay off her father's hospital debts, enough for her sister to go back to college, enough so Sophia would never have to choose between buying food or medicine again, but not enough to erase what she'd be selling. Her body, her womb, an entire year of her life, and maybe her soul. Why me? The question came out before she could stop it. Her voice trembled, but she lifted her chin, forcing herself to meet his eyes. Alexander finally looked at her. His gaze was piercing, analytical, as if she were a problem to be solved. He tilted his head slightly, his fingers drumming once on the table. "Because you need to, and because you won't give me trouble." Sophia felt the blood rush to her face. "Trouble? You mean expectations?" "Exactly." He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "I'm not looking for a wife. I'm not looking for romance. I'm not looking for emotional complications. I'm looking for a solution. You are that solution." She should have stood up, should have thrown that contract in his face and walked out, slamming the door. But then the image of her father, thin and pale in his hospital bed, flashed through her mind. Her sister's voice on the phone, crying because she'd withdrawn from school, the red envelope with the electric bill sitting on the kitchen table. Sophia clenched her fists. "And if I accept, what do you expect from me?" Alexander picked up a pen and spun it between his fingers as if he were considering the question for the first time. "That you show up when needed, that you follow the medical instructions, that you don't cause public scandals, that you don't get attached." He paused, "and that you disappear when it's all over." "Disappear," she repeated as if testing the weight of the word in her mouth. "Yes, without a trace. No lawsuits. No drama. You get the payment. I get the heir. We both move on." Sophia looked down at her own hands. They were shaking. She hid them under the table. "And if I change my mind, you won't." The answer came quick, cutting. Alexander leaned forward, his eyes locked on hers. "Because you don't have a choice. And we both know it." The silence that followed was suffocating. Sophia could hear the hum of the air conditioning, the distant noise of traffic below, the rapid beating of her own heart. He was right. She didn't have a choice. Alexander pushed the pen toward her. "Sign, Sophia, and I'll take care of everything." She picked up the pen. The metal was cold in her fingers. She looked at the dotted line at the end of the last page where her name should appear, where her freedom would be traded for a paper promise. "Are you sure you won't regret this?" she whispered, more to herself than to him. Alexander stood up, adjusting his shirt cuffs. He was tall, very tall. She had to tilt her head back to face him. "Regret is a waste of time," he said with that low, controlled voice. "I don't regret anything." Sophia took a deep breath, and then, before she could think twice, she pressed the pen against the paper and signed. Alexander took the contract, glanced briefly at her signature, and nodded, satisfied. "Good. My lawyer will contact you about the next steps. You'll move into my penthouse by Friday." "Friday?" Sophia's eyes widened. "That's 3 days from now." "Yes. Is that a problem?" She opened her mouth. but no words came out. Problems. She had a whole list, but none of them mattered now. Alexander was already at the door. He stopped, his hand on the frame, and looked at her over his shoulder. "Oh, and Sophia. Yes, don't fall in love with me. That's not in the contract." And then he left, leaving her alone in that huge, cold, empty room, holding a copy of the contract she'd just signed. Sophia looked at the paper in her hands. Her fingerprints were still damp with sweat on the page. She felt a tight knot in her throat. But she refused to cry. She had sold a year of her life, and now all that was left was to find out how much of that year she'd still own herself. Sophia never imagined luxury could feel so suffocating. Alexander Hawthorne's penthouse occupied the top 2 floors of one of Manhattan's most exclusive buildings. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the city like a carpet of blinking lights. But all Sophia felt when looking outside was distance, as if she were floating somewhere between the sky and the ground, belonging to neither. The place was immaculate, modern, minimalist, white walls, furniture in shades of gray and black, straight lines, and gleaming surfaces. Everything looked like it came out of an architecture magazine. Beautiful, but empty. There were no photographs, no plants, not even a pillow out of place. It was like living inside a showroom. Sophia carried only one small suitcase and a backpack. Everything she owned fit in there. When the butler, a middle-aged man named Reginald, always in a dark suit with impeccable posture, led her to what would be her room, she almost laughed. The closet was bigger than the apartment where she lived with her sister. "You may request anything through the intercom," Reginald said, pointing to a touch panel on the wall. "Meals, cleaning, any necessity. Mr. Hawthorne is rarely home, but he expects you to follow the established routine." "Routine?" Sophia blinked. Setting her suitcase on the king-sized bed covered in spotless white sheets, Reginald handed her a tablet. On the screen, a detailed schedule. 7 a.m. Breakfast. Pre-selected menu. 8:30 a.m. Prenatal vitamins. 10 a.m. Light exercise, yoga or walking. 12 p.m. Lunch. 3 p.m. Medical appointment, Mondays and Thursdays. 6 p.m. Dinner. 10 p.m. Rest. Sophia read the list twice. Her life reduced to a series of schedules and obligations. "What if I want to go out?" she asked, trying to sound casual. Reginald hesitated. "Mr. Hawthorne prefers that you remain at home for safety." "Safety." Sophia repeated the word slowly. "Hors surveillance." The butler didn't answer, but the silence said everything. That first night, Sophia explored the penthouse. The kitchen was equipped with appliances she didn't even know how to use. The living room had a grand piano that looked like it had never been played. There was a library with shelves full of books, organized by color, not by author, not by subject, but by aesthetics. And there were cameras, small, discreet, but unmistakable. One in the hallway, another in the living room. A third one pointed at the front door. Sophia felt a chill run up her spine. Alexander wasn't there, but somehow he was watching, always watching. She went back to her room and locked the door, though she knew it was pointless. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked at her phone. 3 unread messages from her sister, Olivia. "Soph, you okay? Dad asked about you today. He seemed better. Call me when you can. Love you." Sophia typed a response, deleted it, typed again. "I'm fine. Just adjusting. Take care of Dad. Kiss." She couldn't tell the truth, couldn't say she'd sold herself, that she now lived in a golden cage waiting to be used as a human incubator. The days that followed were a mechanical routine. Sophia would wake up, eat, take her vitamins, do yoga alone in the empty room, have lunch, watch TV without paying attention, have dinner, and go back to her room. Reginald was polite but distant. She rarely saw anyone else. And Alexander. Alexander was a ghost. He was never home when she woke up, never had dinner with her, never even crossed her path. But he left signs of his presence. A tie hanging over the back of a chair, an empty coffee cup in the sink, a note on the refrigerator. "Medical appointment tomorrow at 3 p.m. Reginald will take you. No, good morning. No, how are you?" Just short orders written in firm, impersonal handwriting. Sophia started to wonder if he actually existed, or if she'd signed a contract with a ghost. One night, she woke up thirsty. She went down to the kitchen barefoot, wearing only a cotton nightgown. The penthouse was dark, lit only by the city lights coming through the windows. And then she saw him. Alexander was standing in front of the window, hands in his dress pants, pockets, shoulders tense. He wore a white shirt, no tie, sleeves rolled up to his elbows. His profile was outlined against the city lights, sharp jawline, distant expression, as if he were lost somewhere she couldn't reach. Sophia stopped in the middle of the room, holding her breath. He didn't see her or pretended not to. For a moment, she just watched him. There was something lonely about him, something broken beneath all that armor of coldness. Then, as if feeling the weight of her gaze, Alexander turned his head. Their eyes met. Sophia felt her heart race. He said nothing, just looked at her up and down slowly, as if seeing her for the first time, or as if finally admitting she was there. She took a step back instinctively. Alexander frowned. "You should be sleeping. I was thirsty." Her voice came out weak, almost a whisper. He didn't respond, just kept looking at her, those dark green eyes cutting through her like a blade. Sophia felt her face heat up. She was half naked, vulnerable, exposed, and he was devouring her with his eyes without even touching her. "Good night, Mr. Hawthorne," she murmured, turning around. "Alexander." She stopped. "Call me Alexander," he said, turning back to the window. "After all, you are my wife." Sophia swallowed hard. Wife. The word sounded strange, artificial. "Good night, Alexander." She climbed the stairs quickly, her heart pounding in her chest. When she reached her room, she locked the door and leaned against it, breathing deeply. Something had changed in that brief encounter. Something in the air, in his gaze, in the way her name had sounded on his lips. And Sophia realized, with a mix of fear and fascination, that this golden cage was starting to close around her. The fertility clinic was in a discreet building on the Upper East Side. With beige walls and artificial plants that tried unsuccessfully to convey warmth, Sophia entered through the revolving door with sweaty hands, her stomach churning. Reginald had dropped her off at the entrance and left without a word. She was alone, or at least she thought she was. When she gave her name at the reception desk, the attendant smiled politely and pointed to the waiting room. "You can wait over there. Mr. Hawthorne has already arrived." Sophia froze. "He is here." "Yes, ma'am. In the VIP room." Of course, VIP room. Because even at a fertility clinic, Alexander Hawthorne needed to be separated from the rest of humanity. Sophia followed the hallway, her shoes making a muffled sound against the gray carpet. When she pushed open the door to the reserved room, the air seemed heavier. Alexander was sitting in a leather armchair, flipping through a medical magazine as if he were reading the financial news. He wore an impeccable navy blue suit, silver tie, hair perfectly combed. He looked like he'd stepped out of a fashion editorial. Cold, unreachable, beautifully distant. He looked up when she entered. He didn't smile, just nodded as if confirming the presence of a subordinate at a meeting. "Sophia, Alexander." She closed the door behind her and sat in the armchair across from his, keeping a safe distance. "I didn't know you were coming. It's my child." He closed the magazine and placed it on the coffee table with surgical precision. "Of course I'd come. Of course. Logical. Because Alexander Hawthorne did everything by logic, never by feeling." Sophia crossed her arms, trying to seem less uncomfortable than she actually was. "So, you're going to come into the appointment with me?" "Yes." "Right." She bit her lip, looking away. She didn't know why this bothered her so much. Maybe because until that moment everything had been distant, abstract, a contract, papers, words. But now it was becoming real, terrifyingly real. They sat in silence for a few minutes. Sophia looked at the magazines stacked on the table, all about health, maternity, fertility. Words like conception, eggs, implantation, jumped from the covers. She felt her stomach turn. Alexander, on the other hand, seemed completely at ease. He checked his watch, a Patek Philippe that probably cost more than she'd earned in her entire life, and crossed his legs, waiting with the cold patience of someone accustomed to having control over everything. Finally, the door opened, and a doctor entered. A middle-aged woman, gray hair pulled into a bun, white coat. Professional and kind expression. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Hawthorne." "Mr. Hawthorne." She extended her hand to both of them. "I'm Dr. Patel. Shall we begin?" Sophia shook her hand, trying to smile. Alexander just tilted his head, not touching the doctor. They were led to an examination room. White, clean, cold. It smelled of disinfectant and something chemical that Sophia couldn't identify. There was an exam table covered with disposable paper, a desk with medical instruments, and a computer screen displaying charts she didn't understand. I'll need to do some routine tests before we start the process, explained Dr. Patel while putting on latex gloves. Ultrasound, blood work, hormone analysis. It's all very standard. You can wait here, Mr. Hawthorne. Or if you prefer, I'll stay. His voice cut through the air like a blade. Sophia looked at him, surprised. Alexander was leaning against the wall, arms crossed, face an unreadable mask. But his eyes were fixed on her. Intense. Watchful. All right. Dr. Patel gestured to Sophia. Then please get on the table and lie down. Sophia obeyed, feeling the disposable paper crinkle under her body. She looked at the ceiling, trying to distract herself, but it was impossible to ignore his presence. Alexander said nothing, didn't move, but she felt the weight of his gaze on her as if he were evaluating, analyzing, possessing. The doctor pulled over the ultrasound equipment and applied the cold gel on Sophia's abdomen. She flinched. Sorry, it's cold, murmured Dr. Patel. Moving the transducer across her skin, Sophia bit her lip, fixing her eyes on the screen. Gray and black shapes appeared and disappeared. She didn't understand any of it, didn't know what she was seeing, but Alexander understood. She noticed because suddenly he took a step forward, just one, but it was enough for his presence to become impossible to ignore. Is everything all right? He asked, his voice low but firm. Perfectly. Dr. Patel smiled, looking at the screen. Healthy uterus, ovaries functioning properly. I see here that ovulation is regular. Mrs. Hawthorne is in excellent condition for natural or assisted conception. Should you choose that route? Sophia closed her eyes. Excellent condition for conception, as if she were livestock being evaluated for breeding. The appointment continued. Questions about menstrual cycle. Medical history. Allergies. Medication use. Alexander listened to everything in silence, his eyes fixed on Sophia, or rather on her body, as if he were studying every detail, every curve, every reaction. I'll prescribe some prenatal vitamins and folic acid, said Dr. Patel, making notes in the chart, and schedule the next exams for 2 weeks from now. Any questions? Sophia shook her head. Her voice had disappeared somewhere between discomfort and humiliation. Alexander, however, spoke. Does she need anything else? Specific diet. Restrictions. The doctor smiled. Nothing too strict. Balanced diet. Hydration. Avoid alcohol and cigarettes. But from what I see here, Mrs. Hawthorne already follows a healthy lifestyle. Perfect. Alexander nodded. Then everything set, as if he were closing a business deal. When they finally left the examination room, Sophia felt her legs weak. She stopped in the hallway, leaning against the wall to catch her breath. Alexander stopped beside her, said nothing, just waited. You didn't need to stay, she murmured. Not looking at him, I wanted to stay. Why? Sophia turned her face, facing him. To make sure I wouldn't change my mind? To watch me? Alexander took a step toward her. Just one. But suddenly he was too close. So close she could smell him. Something woody, masculine, disturbingly seductive. To make sure, he said, his voice low and dangerously calm, that you're being well taken care of. Sophia blinked, surprised. There was something different in his voice, something almost protective. Before she could respond, the elevator doors opened. Alexander gestured for her to enter first. Sophia obeyed, stepping into the small mirrored space. He entered right behind her, pressing the ground floor button. The doors closed, and suddenly they were alone. Sophia positioned herself in a corner, arms crossed, staring fixedly at the numbers slowly descending. Ba. T. Luke. But she felt it. Felt his gaze burning her skin. Traveling over every inch of her body, she turned her head just enough to catch his reflection in the mirror. Alexander stood behind her, hands in his pockets. But his eyes were locked on her, intense, hungry, as if he were fighting against something he didn't want to admit. Sophia swallowed hard. Her heart raced. Woo, sis, san. Alexander took a step forward. Just one, but now he was right behind her. So close, she could feel the heat of his body radiating against her back. She stopped breathing. He leaned in just a few inches. His breath brushed against her neck, hot and heavy. Sophia. His voice was almost a whisper, loaded with something she couldn't name. She closed her eyes, her fingers gripping her own arms. She didn't dare move, didn't dare speak. Her entire body was on fire. Fear, desire, confusion, all mixed together in a storm she didn't know how to control. And then the elevator stopped. Ding! The doors opened. Alexander stepped back immediately as if he'd been burned. He left first without looking back, without saying a word. His footsteps echoed in the marble lobby, quick and determined. Sophia stood still for a moment, trembling. Her heart was pounding so loudly she was sure he could hear it. What the hell had just happened? She stepped out of the elevator on shaky legs, trying to process. Alexander was already at the door waiting. His face was a mask of control again, cold, distant, as if that moment in the elevator had never happened. But Sophia knew. She had felt it, had felt his breath on her skin, the heat of his body so close to hers, the tension vibrating between them like a wire about to snap. And worst of all, she had liked it. She had wished he wouldn't stop. Sophia knew this day would come. It was in the contract. It was in the medical exams. It was the reason she'd sold a year of her life, but knowing it didn't make it any easier. It was almost 10 at night when she heard the penthouse door open, firm footsteps in the hallway, the unmistakable sound of Alexander arriving home. Something that rarely happened before midnight. Sophia was sitting on the bed wearing a silk pajama set that Reginald had left for her earlier. Light blue, délicat, expensive. She hated it. It felt like a costume, a wardrobe for a role she didn't want to play. Her hands trembled as she flipped through a book. She wasn't actually reading. The words danced on the page, meaningless. Her heart beat so fast she could feel the pulse in her throat. He's going to come. She knew it. Somehow she knew. And then 3 knocks on the door. Firm, decisive. Sophia closed the book, swallowed hard, and whispered, "Come in." The door opened. Alexander stood in the doorway, still wearing dress pants and a white shirt, but no tie. The first few buttons were open, revealing the tanned skin of his neck. His sleeves were rolled up to his elbows. He looked tired, not physically, but emotionally, as if carrying that armor of ice exhausted him. His eyes met hers, and for a brief second, Sophia saw something beyond the coldness, something almost human. "May I come in?" he asked, his voice low, controlled. She wanted to say no, wanted to scream that she wasn't ready, that she needed more time, but time was a luxury she couldn't afford. "Yes." Alexander entered and closed the door behind him. The sound of the lock clicking was too loud in the silence. He didn't approach immediately, just stood there watching her as if trying to decide something. Sophia got up from the bed barefoot, her toes sinking into the soft carpet. She crossed her arms over her chest, trying to hide how much she was shaking. "You don't need to be afraid of me," he said suddenly. Sophia let out a bitter laugh. "It's not you I'm afraid of. What then?" She hesitated. "Myself. Forgetting that this is just a contract." Alexander frowned. He took a step forward, then another. Each movement was calculated, slow, as if he were approaching something wild that could flee at any moment. When he stopped in front of her, Sophia had to tilt her head back to face him. He was tall, imposing, and so close she could smell him, that woody scent mixed with something warm and masculine that made her dizzy. "It is a contract," he repeated, his voice firm. "Nothing more, nothing more," she echoed, trying to convince herself. Alexander raised his hand slowly, as if giving her time to pull back. His fingers brushed the side of her face so lightly it almost didn't seem real. Sophia closed her eyes, feeling a shiver run down her spine. "Are you sure about that?" he whispered, his voice. She didn't know if he was asking her or himself. Sophia opened her eyes and met his gaze. Dark green, intense. There was something there. Something dangerous. Something that threatened to break all the rules they had established. "No," she admitted, her voice weak. "But it doesn't matter." Something changed in his face. His jaw tightened, his eyes darkened. And then, without warning, he grabbed her waist with both hands and pulled her against his body. Sophia gasped. His chest was solid, warm, and she could feel his heart beating, fast, racing, as out of control as hers. Alexander. He didn't let her finish. His mouth captured hers in a fierce, possessive, desperate kiss. There was no gentleness, no hesitation. It was pure need, as if he were trying to prove something to her, to himself. She didn't know. Sophia should have pushed him away, should have resisted, but her body betrayed her mind. Her fingers tangled in his shirt, pulling him closer. Her mouth opened under his, allowing him to invade her, consume her. Alexander groaned low against her lips, and the sound was like an electric shock. His hands slid from her back to her hips, squeezing, marking. He pushed her gently until her legs touched the edge of the bed. When he finally pulled away, they were both breathless. Sophia looked at him, confused, lost. Her lips were swollen, red. Alexander ran his thumb over her mouth slowly, and she saw something burn in his eyes. "Lie down," he ordered, his voice. She obeyed. She lay down on the bed, her heart racing, her whole body on fire. Alexander watched her for a long moment, as if he were burning that image into his memory. Then he climbed onto the bed, positioning himself over her, his arms braced on either side of her head. He was so close she could count every eyelash, every small scar on his perfect face. "This doesn't mean anything," he whispered, as if trying to convince himself. "It's just biology." "Biology," she repeated, knowing it was a lie. His hands found the buttons of her pajama top. He unbuttoned them one by one, slowly, his eyes fixed on hers. Sophia held her breath as the silk slid from her shoulders, exposing bare skin. Alexander closed his eyes for a second, as if fighting against himself. Then he lowered his head and pressed his lips against her collarbone, then her neck, then the curve of her shoulder. Sophia arched her back, a moan escaping her lips. Her hands found his hair, fingers tangling in the dark strands. "Alexander," she whispered. Not knowing if it was a request or a plea, he raised his face, his eyes burning. "Don't talk. Don't talk." Because words would make it real. Words would break the illusion that this was just obligation. The rest happened in silence. Urgent touches, ragged breaths, skin against skin. Their bodies met, merged, moved in an ancient and inevitable dance. Sophia closed her eyes, trying to distance herself, trying to remember that this was just part of the agreement. But it was impossible because every touch of his burned, every movement consumed her. And when they finally reached climax together, she felt something break inside her, something she couldn't repair. Afterward, Alexander rolled to the side, his chest rising and falling rapidly. He didn't touch her, didn't hold her, just lay there staring at the ceiling, jaw tense. Sophia pulled the sheet over her body, feeling exposed, vulnerable. She waited for him to say something, anything. Finally, he spoke. "This won't happen again." The words were like a slap. Sophia turned her face toward him, incredulous. "What? This?" He gestured vaguely between them. "It won't happen again. From now on, we'll use artificial insemination." She blinked, trying to process. "But you." It was a mistake. He got up from the bed, putting on his pants quickly without looking at her. "I lost control. It won't happen again." Sophia felt something painful settle in her chest, anger, humiliation, and something worse, rejection. "I see." Her voice came out cold, cutting. "So, you got what you wanted. You can leave now." Alexander stopped at the door. For a moment, she thought he would come back, that he would admit he'd lied, but he didn't come back. He just opened the door and left, leaving her alone in the bed, naked, trembling, with the taste of him still on her lips. And Sophia realized with a painful tightness in her chest that he was right. This couldn't happen again, because if it did, she wouldn't know anymore where the contract ended and where the feeling began. 2 weeks had passed since that night. 2 weeks of suffocating silence. Alexander had gone back to being a ghost, leaving before Sophia woke up, returning after she was asleep or pretending to be asleep. They didn't talk, didn't touch, didn't look at each other. It was as if nothing had happened except it had happened, and Sophia couldn't forget. No matter how many times she tried to convince herself that it had just been part of the contract, her body remembered, her lips remembered, her heart, that damned, treacherous heart remembered. On Saturday morning, Reginald handed her a gold envelope. "Mr. Hawthorne requests your presence at a charity event tonight," the butler said with his usual politeness. "A dress has been selected for you. It's in the closet." Sophia took the envelope, looking at the invitation printed in elegant lettering. Mount Sinai, Hospital Charity Gala, attire. Black tie. Of course, Alexander Hawthorne needed a presentable wife to keep up appearances, and she, like a good hired employee, should play her part. She hated it, hated the way he controlled her, how he dictated every aspect of her life. But what could she do? Tear up the invitation? Refuse. The contract was clear. She should accompany him to social events when requested. That evening, Sophia dressed mechanically. The dress was stunning. A long dark red satin gown with an off-shoulder neckline and a discreet slit on the side. Elegant, sophisticated, expensive. She pulled her hair into a low bun, applied subtle makeup, and put on the heels Reginald had left. When she came downstairs, Alexander was already waiting in the living room. He wore a black tuxedo, bow tie, hair impeccably combed. He looked like he'd stepped out of a magazine, cold, distant, unreachable. His eyes traveled over her quickly from her shoes to her face. but his expression didn't change. No compliment, no smile, just a curt nod. Let's go. The event was held in a luxury hotel ballroom in downtown Manhattan. Crystal chandeliers, tables decorated with white flowers, champagne served in crystal flutes. Classical music played in the background. Everything was excessively elegant, excessively perfect. Sophia followed Alexander through the crowd, her arm resting lightly on his, a performance for the public. He greeted businessmen, doctors, politicians. Always with that courteous, empty smile. She smiled beside him, waved, pretended to be the loving wife, but inside she felt hollow. At one point, Alexander was pulled into a conversation with a group of investors. Sophia took the opportunity to escape toward the bar. She ordered sparkling water, something simple, something to help her breathe. First time at one of these events? A soft voice came from beside her. Sophia turned and found a man smiling at her. He was tall, dark-haired, with slightly tousled hair and warm brown eyes. He wore a tuxedo, but in a relaxed way, the tie slightly loose, the sleeves discreetly pulled up. Sorry, didn't mean to startle you. He extended his hand. Dr. Marcus Reyes, pediatric surgeon at Mount Sinai. Sophia shook his hand, surprised by the kindness. Sophia Hawthorne. Ah, you're Alexander Hawthorne's wife. Marcus smiled, but there was no malice in his tone. I heard he'd gotten married recently. Congratulations. Thank you. Sophia forced a smile. Marcus picked up a champagne flute and toasted lightly. So, enjoying the event, or are you as bored as I am? Sophia let out a genuine laugh. The first in weeks, honestly. Bored. I knew it. He laughed, his eyes sparkling. These events are always the same. Same people, same conversations, same expensive champagne that nobody really appreciates. Then why did you come? Professional obligation. He shrugged. And because I like helping the hospital, but between you and me, I'd rather be home watching a bad movie. Sophia smiled again. There was something refreshing about Marcus. He was light, easy, different from Alexander, who carried the weight of the world in every word, every look. They talked for a few minutes. Marcus told funny stories about his patients, children who asked absurd questions, who drew pictures for him, who reminded him why he'd chosen this profession. Sophia found herself laughing, relaxing for the first time in weeks. It was good to talk to someone who didn't treat her like an obligation, someone who saw her as a person. You have a beautiful smile, Marcus said suddenly, almost shyly. Sorry, that was inappropriate. Sophia felt her face heat up. No, thank you. And then she felt it. A presence, heavy, intense, dangerous. She turned her head and saw Alexander standing a few yards away. His eyes locked on her and Marcus. His face was a mask of ice, but his eyes burned. Sophia swallowed hard. I need to go. Of course. Marcus smiled. It was a pleasure meeting you, Sophia. She barely managed to respond before feeling Alexander's hand grab her arm. Firm, possessive. Let's go, he said, his voice low and dangerous. Sophia barely had time to say goodbye to Marcus before being dragged through the ballroom. Alexander led her to an empty hallway, away from the crowd, away from curious eyes. When he finally stopped, he released her arm forcefully. What were you doing? He asked, his voice controlled but trembling with anger. Sophia rubbed her arm, looking at him with disbelief. Talking? Is that a crime with him? Alexander took a step forward, his eyes flashing. Do you know who he is? A doctor, a kind man, someone who actually treated me like a human being. Alexander let out a bitter laugh. Kind? Of course. And you fell for it, didn't you? What are you talking about? Sophia felt anger rising. I was just talking. I didn't commit any crime. You're my wife on paper? She shouted, her voice echoing through the empty hallway. I'm your wife on paper, Alexander, not for real. You made that very clear yourself. Something broke in his face. His jaw tightened, his fists clenched, and then, without warning, he advanced. Sophia backed up until her back hit the wall. Alexander pressed his hands on either side of her head, trapping her, his dark green eyes burning with something she couldn't name. You think it's not real? He whispered, his voice dangerous. You think I don't? He stopped as if fighting against the words. Sophia lifted her chin, defying him. Don't what, Alexander? Finish the sentence. He didn't answer. Instead, he grabbed her face with both hands and kissed her. It wasn't like the kiss from that night. It wasn't calculated or controlled. It was brutal, desperate, loaded with jealousy, anger, and something deeper, something he didn't want to admit. Sophia tried to resist, tried to push him away. But her body, that damned treacherous body, melted under his touch. Her hands moved up to his chest, then his neck, fingers tangling in his dark hair. Alexander groaned against her lips, pressing his body against hers, eliminating any space between them. His hands slid down her waist, her hips, marking, possessing. When he finally pulled away, they were both breathless. Alexander rested his forehead against hers, eyes closed, chest rising and falling rapidly. "You can't smile at him like that," he whispered, his voice broken. "You can't. You can't." Sophia opened her eyes, confused. "Lost, Alexander." He pulled back abruptly, running his hands through his hair, undoing the perfection. He looked desperate, vulnerable, human. This was a mistake. He murmured more to himself than to her, and then he turned his back and left, leaving her there, leaning against the wall, trembling with the taste of him still on her lips. Sophia slid down the wall until she was sitting on the floor, her legs too weak to support her. What the hell was happening? Alexander had said this was just a contract, that it didn't mean anything. But that kiss hadn't been from someone who felt nothing. That kiss had been from someone who was jealous, and Sophia realized with a mix of fear and hope that the rules of the game had changed. Something had changed. Sophia felt it in the air, in the way Alexander looked at her now, no longer with calculated indifference, but with something deeper, more dangerous. He still kept his distance, still disappeared for hours on end, but when they were in the same room, the tension was palpable, like electricity about to explode. 3 days had passed since the charity event, 3 days since that kiss in the hallway. Neither of them had mentioned what happened, but it was impossible to pretend it hadn't. On Wednesday morning, Sophia woke up early, earlier than usual. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, and the penthouse was immersed in a soft, bluish light. She slipped a silk robe over her pajamas and went down to the kitchen, her bare feet sliding silently across the cold floor. She needed tea, something hot, comforting to help organize the chaotic thoughts that kept her awake night after night. But when she entered the kitchen, she stopped abruptly. Alexander was there. He was standing in front of the panoramic window, a cup of coffee in his hands, looking at the city beginning to wake. He wore gray sweatpants and a simple black t-shirt, the first time Sophia had seen him without a suit. His hair was disheveled, as if he'd just woken up, or as if he hadn't slept. He looked different, less imposing, less unreachable, almost human. Sophia hesitated in the doorway, considering going back. But it was too late. He'd already noticed her presence. Alexander turned his head slightly, just enough to see her briefly. He said nothing, just went back to looking out the window. Sophia took a deep breath and entered the kitchen, trying to seem casual. She grabbed the kettle, filled it with water, and placed it on the stove. The silence between them was thick, but not uncomfortable. It was distracted, as if both were waiting for the other to speak first. While the water heated, Sophia leaned against the counter, watching him discreetly. There was something different about him that morning. Something tired, vulnerable. The lines around his eyes seemed deeper, the tension in his shoulders more evident. "You didn't sleep," she said suddenly, surprised by her own courage. Alexander took a sip of coffee. "No. Why not?" He hesitated. For a moment, Sophia thought he wouldn't answer, but then he spoke low, almost to himself. "I can't." Sophia frowned. "How long has it been?" "Doesn't matter." "Alexander, drop it." "Sophia." His voice was firm, but not hostile. "Just tired." The kettle whistled. Sophia prepared her tea, watching the hot water transform the leaves into an aromatic, comforting mixture. She picked up the cup and, instead of going back to her room, approached the window. She stood beside him, not too close, but close enough that their arms almost touched. They stood there in silence, watching the city wake up, the apartment lights turning on one by one, the first cars on the streets, the sky changing from dark blue to shades of orange and pink. "It's beautiful," Sophia murmured, more to break the silence than anything else. "It is," Alexander said, looking at her, not at the city. "Yes, it is." Something in his tone made Sophia's heart race. She turned her face and met his eyes, dark green, intense, fixed on her. It wasn't the cold, calculating look from before. It was something else, something softer, more real. Sophia swallowed hard, looking away quickly. "You work too much." "Yes. Why?" Alexander let out a low laugh without humor. Because it's easier than being here. Why is it hard to be here? He didn't answer, just took another sip of coffee, jaw tense. Sophia took a deep breath, gathering courage. Alexander, about that night and about the event, don't. He cut her off, but his voice wasn't aggressive. It was almost pleading. Don't talk about it. Why not? Because he closed his eyes as if fighting against something. Because if we talk about it, it becomes real. And I can't let it become real. Sophia felt something painful. Squeeze her chest. Why not? Alexander opened his eyes and looked directly at her. Because it wasn't in the plans. Because it's not part of the agreement. Because I shouldn't. He stopped, squeezing the cup so hard Sophia thought it would break. Shouldn't what? She insisted, her voice low. He didn't answer. Instead, he placed the cup on the counter and took a step toward her. Sophia held her breath. Alexander was so close now she could feel the heat from his body, see every detail of his face, the small scars, the expression lines, the tired shine in his eyes. You shouldn't be this close, he whispered. His voice. Sophia lifted her chin, defying him. You're the one who came closer. A muscle in his jaw twitched. He raised his hand slowly, as if in a trance, and brushed a strand of hair from her face, tucking it behind her ear. His fingers grazed her skin lightly, almost shyly. Sophia closed her eyes, her heart racing. That simple touch burned more than any kiss. Sophia. Alexander murmured her name like a prayer or a curse. She opened her eyes and met his. They were so close now, she could see her own reflection in those dark green irises. What do you want from me? She whispered. Alexander stopped, his hand still on her face. He opened his mouth as if to answer, but then closed it again. His expression was tortured, torn between what he wanted and what he thought he should do. Finally, he pulled back. I need to go. Alexander, I have a meeting. He was already moving away, grabbing the cup, avoiding looking at her. Reginald will take you to the medical appointment this afternoon. And then he left, leaving Sophia alone in the kitchen, trembling with the sensation of his touch, still burning on her skin. She leaned against the counter, trying to catch her breath. Her legs were weak, her heart out of control. Something was changing between them, something inevitable and terrifying. Alexander was fighting against it. She saw it in his eyes, in the way he pulled back whenever they got too close. But the fight was getting harder and harder, and Sophia realized with a mix of hope and fear that she wasn't the only one feeling it. He was too. Alexander Hawthorne, the man who didn't believe in love, who had created a contract to avoid emotional complications, was starting to feel something he couldn't control, and that changed everything. That night, Sophia couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every word, every look, every touch from that morning. Around 1:0 inches the morning, she heard footsteps in the hallway, slow, hesitant. They stopped in front of her door. Sophia held her breath, her heart racing. She waited for him to knock, waited for him to come in, but he didn't come in. He just stood there on the other side of the door for long minutes. Sophia could feel his presence, heavy, conflicted, and then the footsteps moved away. Sophia closed her eyes, feeling something painful. Squeeze her chest. He was fighting, resisting, but for how long could he hold out? And more importantly, for how long could she? Sophia looked at the pregnancy test for the 10th time, as if the 2 pink lines could somehow disappear. But they remained there, stubborn, undeniable, positive. She was pregnant. Sitting on the cold bathroom floor, her back against the tub, Sophia held the small plastic stick with trembling hands. She should be happy, or at least relieved. After all, this was why she was here. It was the purpose of that entire contract, of that entire sacrifice. But all she felt was fear. Fear of what would come next. Fear of how Alexander would react. Fear that now that he'd have what he wanted, she'd become even more invisible to him. Or worse, fear that he'd never touch her again, never look at her that way again, never stand outside her door in the middle of the night again, fighting against something neither of them could name. Sophia took a deep breath, wiped away tears she hadn't realized were falling, and stood up. She washed her face, looked at her own reflection in the mirror. Red eyes, pale face, frightened expression, and tried to gather courage. She needed to tell him. It was almost 7:0 inches the evening. Alexander hadn't come home yet, but Sophia knew he would. He always did eventually, even if it was just to grab documents or change clothes. She went downstairs to the living room and waited. At 8:30, the door opened. Alexander entered as always, focused, distant. He carried his leather briefcase in one hand, his phone in the other. His tie slightly loosened. He looked tired. Not physically. Alexander never looked physically tired, but there was something heavy on his shoulders, something he carried and pretended didn't exist. He stopped when he saw Sophia sitting on the couch. Their eyes met for a brief second before he looked away. "Good evening," he said, his voice neutral, controlled. "Good evening." Sophia stood up, her hands nervously clasped in front of her body. "Do you have a minute?" Alexander hesitated. He looked at his watch, at his phone, as if searching for an excuse to escape. But then he sighed and placed his briefcase on the table. "Sure." Sophia swallowed hard. She picked up the envelope that was beside her on the couch. Inside the official blood test results she'd done that morning, confirming what the pharmacy test had already said. She extended the envelope to him. Alexander frowned, confused, but took it. He opened it with precise movements, removed the paper, and read. Sophia watched every micro-expression on his face. She saw the exact moment he understood. His eyes widened slightly, his jaw tightened, his fingers squeezed the paper. He read it again, then a third time, as if he needed to be sure. Then slowly, he raised his eyes to her. "You're pregnant." It wasn't a question. It was a statement. "Yes." Sophia's voice came out weak, almost a whisper. Alexander was silent. He just looked at her, the paper still in his hands, as if processing. His face was unreadable, a perfect mask of control. Sophia felt her heart squeeze. He didn't look happy. He didn't look relieved. He looked nothing, as if he'd just received a financial report. "Say something," she pleaded, her voice breaking. Alexander blinked as if waking from a trance. He placed the paper carefully on the table and ran his hands over his face, breathing deeply. "I don't know what to say." Sophia let out a humorless laugh. "You got what you wanted. That was the plan, wasn't it? An heir, mission accomplished." He looked at her with a strange expression, almost pained. "Sophia, it's okay." She crossed her arms, trying to protect her own chest from the pain she felt. "I know what this means. Now it's just a matter of time until I fulfill my part of the deal and disappear." "No." The word came out firm, almost a command. Sophia blinked, surprised. "What?" Alexander took a step toward her, then another, and another until he was standing in front of her. So close she had to tilt her head back to face him. "Don't talk like that." His voice was low, intense. "Don't talk as if you were disposable. But isn't that what I am?" Sophia felt tears burn her eyes. "Isn't that why I'm here? To carry your child and then disappear?" Alexander closed his eyes, jaw tense. When he opened them again, there was something different in them. Something vulnerable. "I don't know anymore," he admitted, his voice. Sophia's eyes widened. "What?" He didn't answer. Instead, he did something she never would have expected. He knelt down. Sophia held her breath, shocked. Alexander Hawthorne, the most proud, most controlled man she knew, was on his knees before her. Slowly, almost reverently, he extended his hands and placed them on her belly. Still flat, still with no visible sign of life. But he touched as if he could feel the baby there, as if he could protect it just with his hands. "Alexander," Sophia whispered, tears finally escaping. He pressed his forehead against her abdomen, closing his eyes. His breathing was heavy, irregular, as if he were fighting against something much bigger than himself. "Nothing else matters now." His voice was low, broken, almost inaudible. "You and him are everything." Sophia felt her chest squeeze so tight she could barely breathe. She raised her hands, hesitant, and placed them on his hair, her fingers sliding through the dark strands. They stayed like that for long minutes, in silence, connected in a way that neither the contract nor words nor reason could explain. When Alexander finally stood up, his eyes were red. He wasn't crying. Alexander Hawthorne didn't cry. But something in him had broken, something he'd been holding for too long. "I'm going to take care of you." He held her face with both hands, forcing her to look into his eyes. "Both of you. I promise." Sophia nodded, unable to speak. Tears flowed freely now. Wetting his hands, Alexander wiped them gently with his thumbs. And then, for the first time since they'd met, he hugged her. It wasn't a calculated hug. It wasn't out of obligation. It was desperate, tight, as if he were trying to absorb every part of her. His arms wrapped around her completely, one hand on the back of her neck, the other on her back, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. Sophia buried her face in his chest, feeling his heart beating hard, out of control, as off rhythm as hers. "I'm scared," she confessed against his shirt. "Me, too." Alexander kissed the top of her head, lingering there. "But we'll be okay." I promise. Sophia didn't know if she believed him, didn't know if this was real or if it was just the shock of the news talking. But in that moment, as he held her as if she were the only thing that mattered, she allowed herself to believe, allowed herself to feel, allowed herself to hope, because something had changed that night, something irreversible. Alexander Hawthorne, the man who never wanted emotional complications, had just admitted he could no longer pretend, and Sophia realized with a mix of fear and relief that she couldn't either. Later that night, after Alexander insisted she eat dinner and rest, Sophia went upstairs to her room, but before sleeping, she looked out the window and saw the light in his office still on. He was there, probably working, trying to process everything. But something was different now because for the first time since she'd signed that contract, Sophia felt that maybe, just maybe, this could become something more than an agreement. Maybe it could become real. The weeks that followed were different, subtly different, but impossible to ignore. Alexander still worked long hours, but now he came home earlier. He had dinner with Sophia, sometimes in silence, sometimes exchanging a few words about their day. He asked how she was feeling, if she had morning sickness, if she needed anything. Small attentions that coming from him seemed monumental. Sophia noticed other changes too. The way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching, the way his fingers brushed against hers when they passed something at the table, the way he hesitated before leaving in the morning, as if he wanted to say something, but didn't know how. The tension between them hadn't disappeared. On the contrary, it was more intense than ever. But now it was different. It wasn't just physical desire. It was something deeper, more frightening. It was connection. On a Friday night, Sophia was in the library, wrapped in a blanket, reading a book about pregnancy that Reginald had bought for her. The fireplace was lit, filling the space with comforting warmth. Outside, the city glittered under the light rain that was falling. She heard footsteps and looked up. Alexander stood in the doorway, still wearing dress pants and a white shirt, but no tie. His sleeves were rolled up to his elbows. His hair was slightly disheveled, as if he'd run his hands through it several times. "May I come in?" he asked, his voice low. Sophia closed the book. "It's your house. It's our house." The correction was gentle, but firm. He entered and sat in the armchair next to her, keeping a respectful distance. For a few minutes, they sat in silence, just listening to the crackling of the fire and the sound of rain against the windows. "Are you okay?" Alexander finally asked. "Yes, a little tired, but good." He nodded, eyes fixed on the flames. "I wanted to apologize." Sophia turned to him, surprised. "For what?" "For everything." It took a deep breath. "For treating you like part of a transaction. For being cold, distant. You didn't deserve that." Sophia felt a lump in her throat. "Alexander, let me finish." He finally looked at her, and what Sophia saw in those dark green eyes took her breath away. Vulnerability, sincerity. "I thought I could keep my distance, thought I could treat this like any other business deal, but I can't anymore." "What are you saying?" Alexander stood up and walked to the window, hands in his pockets, shoulders tense. "I'm saying you changed everything. You came into my life like a hurricane and destroyed all the walls I spent years building." Sophia stood up too, letting the blanket fall. "Alexander." He turned to her, and the expression on his face was so intense, Sophia felt her legs weaken. "I shouldn't want you the way I do. Shouldn't think about you all the time. Shouldn't feel my chest tighten every time you smile at someone else, but I do, and it's driving me crazy." Sophia took a step toward him. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I can't keep lying anymore. Not to you. Not to myself." He closed his eyes, jaw tense. "You scare me, Sophia. What I feel for you scares me." "And what do you feel?" Alexander opened his eyes and looked directly at her. "Everything. I feel everything." Sophia's heart raced. She took another step, then another, until she was right in front of him. "Then, show me," she whispered. "Show me what you feel." Alexander held her face with both hands, his thumbs caressing her cheeks. He studied her for a long moment, as if he were burning every detail into his memory. "Are you sure?" His voice was loaded with restrained desire. "Yes." He didn't need to hear anything else. He leaned in and kissed her. But it wasn't like the previous kisses. It wasn't desperate or violent. It was slow, deep, reverent, as if she were something sacred he was finally allowing himself to touch. Sophia melted against him, her hands moving up to his chest, feeling his heart beating hard under her palms. Alexander deepened the kiss, one hand sliding down to her waist, pulling her closer, When they pulled apart, they were both breathless. Alexander rested his forehead against hers. "Sophia, I want you, not out of obligation, not because of the contract. I want you because I can't breathe right anymore when you're not around." Tears burned her eyes. "I want you, too." Something broke in him. Alexander picked her up in his arms with surprising ease, making her let out a small, surprised cry. She clung to his neck, laughing, a light, genuine sound she hadn't made in a long time. He carried her down the hallway, up the stairs, and into his room, not hers. His room was spacious, minimalist, with a huge bed with dark sheets and windows that revealed the illuminated city. Alexander laid her gently on the bed, as if she were made of crystal. Then he leaned over her, supporting himself on his arms, so as not to put weight on her body. "If at any point you want to stop," he began. Sophia placed her fingers over his lips. "I won't want to." Alexander smiled, a genuine, rare smile that completely transformed his face. He kissed her forehead, then her nose, then her lips. Soft kisses, almost shy. His hands found the buttons of her pajama shirt. He unbuttoned them one by one slowly, his eyes fixed on hers the entire time, as if asking permission with each touch. When the silk finally slid from her shoulders, Alexander paused. His eyes traveled over her body, not with raw lust, but with admiration. "Reverence. You're beautiful," he murmured. His voice thick. Sophia felt her face heat up. She brought her hands to the buttons of his shirt, and he let her remove each piece slowly. When they were finally skin against skin, Sophia felt something break inside her. It wasn't just desire, it was connection. It was shared vulnerability. It was love. Even if neither of them had the courage to say the word yet, Alexander kissed every inch of skin he could reach. Her neck, collarbone, shoulder, slowly descending with infinite patience. His hands explored, caressed, memorized. "Alexander." Sophia arched her back, her fingers tangling in his hair. "I know." He moved up again, capturing her lips in a deep kiss. "Me too." When they finally came together, it was different from any other time. There was no rush, no performance. It was just the two of them, discovering each other, surrendering to each other, losing themselves in one another. Alexander moved slowly, eyes fixed on hers, one hand intertwined with hers above her head, the other caressing her face. Sophia wrapped her legs around his waist, pulling him deeper, closer. "Sophia." He whispered her name like a prayer. "I'm here." She held his face, forcing him to look at her. "I'm here." The climax came like a wave, slow, building, inevitable. They both clung to each other, breaths intertwined, bodies trembling, souls merging in a way no contract could predict or control. Afterward, Alexander didn't pull away. He pulled her to his chest, arms wrapping around her completely, as if he wanted to protect her from the entire world. Sophia rested her head on his heart, listening to the strong, steady beats. He stroked her hair, his fingers sliding through the strands in smooth, repetitive movements. "I'm not letting you go," he murmured against the top of her head. "Never." Sophia closed her eyes, feeling tears silently stream down. "Promise. I promise." Alexander held her tighter. "You're mine now. For real. Not because of a contract, but because I choose you." Sophia lifted her face, meeting his eyes. "And I choose you." He smiled, that rare, beautiful smile, and kissed her again, soft, sweet, full of promises. They fell asleep like that, intertwined, hearts beating in sync, knowing that something fundamental had changed between them. The contract still existed, complications would still come, but that night, none of it mattered because for the first time, Alexander Hawthorne allowed himself to feel love, and Sophia Bennett allowed herself to believe she would be loved in return. The days following that night were the happiest Sophia had ever lived. Alexander transformed before her eyes. Still serious, still controlled in public, but at home with her, he was different. He smiled more, touched her frequently, small gestures of affection that left her breathless. He held her hand during dinner, kissed her forehead before leaving for work, laid his head in her lap while she read. Sophia allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, this was real. But happiness, she would soon discover, is fragile. Everything crumbled on a rainy Tuesday. Sophia was in the living room responding to emails on her laptop when Alexander came home in the middle of the afternoon. Something unusual. She looked up, smiling, ready to greet him, but the smile died on her lips when she saw his expression. Alexander stood in the doorway, his face pale, jaw tense. In his hand, a crumpled paper. His eyes, those eyes that had recently looked at her with such tenderness, now burned with anger. Alexander. Sophia closed the laptop, her heart racing. What happened? He didn't answer. Just walked up to her and threw the paper on the table. Sophia looked down. It was an email draft. Her email draft, one she'd written weeks ago before everything changed, but never sent. To Marcus Reyes. Subject: I need help, Marcus. I know we barely know each other, but you were the only person who treated me like a human being at that event. I'm trapped in a complicated situation and don't know who else to talk to. Could you meet me to talk? I need advice. Sophia's blood ran cold. Alexander, this isn't what? He shouted, his voice echoing through the room. Isn't what it looks like? Because it looks like you were planning to run away with that doctor. I wasn't planning anything. Sophia stood up, her hands shaking. This is from weeks ago. I was confused, scared. He never even seen it. But you thought about sending it. Alexander took a step forward, fists clenched. You thought about going to him, about asking him for help and not me, because you weren't here. The words came out before she could stop them. You barely talked to me. He felt alone. Alexander, I needed someone, and you chose him. His voice was loaded with pain, disguised as anger. Of all people, you chose the man who was clearly interested in you. Sophia shook her head, desperate. It wasn't like that. I just wanted to talk to someone who didn't make me feel like an object. And I made you feel that way. It wasn't a question. It was a bitter statement. Sophia hesitated at first. Yes. Alexander recoiled as if he'd been punched. He ran his hands over his face, breathing heavily. So all of this, everything that happened between us was because you were desperate, because you had no one else. No. Sophia took a step toward him, tears beginning to fall. Alexander, it wasn't that. Don't touch me. He cut her off, backing away from her. His eyes were red, his voice broken. Don't. Not now. Sophia stopped, her chest tight. Please listen to me. I trusted you. His voice was low now, dangerously calm. For the first time in my life, I opened my heart to someone. And you? You were thinking about running away. I wasn't. Alexander, please. But he wasn't listening. He grabbed his keys from the table and walked toward the door. Where are you going? Sophia ran after him, desperate. I don't know. Away from here. He stopped at the door without turning around. Away from you. And then he left, slamming the door so hard the pictures on the wall shook. Sophia stood in the middle of the room, trembling, tears flowing freely. She fell to her knees, hugging her own belly, where the baby was growing. The baby that was supposed to unite them, but now seemed to be the only thing left. Hours passed. Sophia called Alexander dozens of times. All calls went to voicemail. She sent messages. No response. Night fell, and with it came fear. Sophia was lying in bed, curled up, when she felt the first twinge of pain. Low, sharp, like a cramp, but worse. She sat up, pressing her hands against her abdomen. No, please. Another twinge. Stronger. A wet warmth between her legs. Sophia looked down and saw the red stain spreading across the sheets. Blood. Panic exploded inside her. She tried to get up, but her legs wouldn't respond. The pain was unbearable. She managed to reach her phone, her hands shaking so much she could barely dial. 911. What's your emergency? I'm pregnant. I'm bleeding. Please. I need help. She gave the address but could barely speak. The pain was so intense her vision began to darken. Help is on the way. Stay on the line with me. But Sophia couldn't. The phone slipped from her hand. She lay on her side, hugging her belly, crying, Please don't. Don't take my baby. Please. And then through the fog of pain and despair, she heard it, footsteps running, the door being broken down. Sophia. Alexander. He was there, kneeling beside her, his face devastated. No. Sophia. Look at me. She tried to focus on his eyes. Alexander, the baby. It's going to be okay. I promise it's going to be okay. He picked her up in his arms, holding her against his chest. His hands were shaking, his voice broken. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Don't leave me, she whispered, clutching his shirt. Never. I'll never leave you. Do you hear me? Never. Sirens sounded outside. Paramedics rushed into the house. Alexander didn't let her go. He carried her to the stretcher, got in the ambulance with her, held her hand the entire way to the hospital. Sophia drifted in and out of consciousness, but every time she opened her eyes, he was there, always there. At the hospital, the doctors worked fast. Hours of tests, ultrasounds, procedures that Sophia could barely follow, and then finally, Dr. Patel entered the room with a tired but relieved expression. "The baby is fine." Sophia let out a sob, covering her face with her hands. Alexander, sitting beside the bed, squeezed her hand so hard it hurt. "You had a partial placental abruption," the doctor explained, "caused by extreme stress, but we managed to stabilize it. The baby is strong. But Sophia, you need complete bed rest. No stress. No tensión. Your body needs to recover." Sophia nodded, unable to speak. The doctor left, leaving them alone. For a long moment, neither of them said anything. Then Alexander stood up, walked to the window, and broke down. He slid down the wall until he was sitting on the floor, his face buried in his hands, his shoulders shaking. Alexander Hawthorne was crying. "I almost lost you," he said, his voice muffled. "I almost lost both of you because of my anger, my insecurity. I don't deserve you." Sophia tried to get out of bed, but was too weak. "Alexander," he raised his face, tears flowing freely. "I was afraid of losing you, and I almost killed you. What kind of man am I? Alexander, come here." She extended her hand. He hesitated, then stood up and walked to her. Sophia held his face, forcing him to look at her. "It wasn't you. It was the stress. It was everything. But you were here. You saved me. I hurt you. And now you're here. That's what matters." Alexander knelt beside the bed, holding her hand against his chest. "I love you, God. I love you so much. It hurts, and I'm so afraid of not being enough." Sophia felt her heart explode. "You love me?" "Yes." He kissed the palm of her hand. "Yes, I love you, and I don't want to pretend anymore. I don't want contracts or rules anymore. I just want you forever." Sophia smiled through her tears. "I love you too." Alexander carefully climbed onto the bed beside her and pulled her into his arms. They stayed like that, intertwined, crying, healing. And Sophia knew with absolute certainty that they would get through this together. 3 months had passed since that terrible night at the hospital. 3 months of recovery, of care, of growing love. Sophia strictly followed the doctor's orders. Bed rest, balanced diet, zero stress. Alexander became her tireless protector. He worked from home whenever possible, hired a private nurse, canceled appointments to be by her side. He read to her at night, massaged her swollen feet, talked to the baby through her belly, as if the little one could already understand him. And somewhere between the care and the whispers, between the shared fears and unexpected laughter, the love between them solidified in a way no contract could have predicted. Now, on a sunny Saturday afternoon, Alexander asked Sophia to meet him in the living room. She came downstairs wearing a light dress that accommodated her already prominent 6-month belly. When she entered, she found him standing in front of the fireplace holding something in his hands. "The contract." Sophia stopped, her heart racing. "Alexander." He turned to her, and what she saw in his eyes made her hold her breath. Determination. Love. Freedom. "Come here," he asked, extending his hand. Sophia approached. Taking his hand, he guided her until she stood in front of the fireplace where the fire crackled softly. "When I created this contract," Alexander began, his voice firm but emotional, "I thought I could control everything. My feelings, my life, even love. I thought love was a weakness, something men like me couldn't afford to feel." He looked at the contract in his hands, then at her. "But you showed me I was wrong. You showed me that love isn't weakness. It's courage. It's choosing someone every day, even when it's hard, even when it hurts." Sophia felt tears burn her eyes. Alexander raised the contract. "This paper says you're my wife by obligation, that you owe me a child and then your freedom. But I don't want that. I never wanted that. I was just too afraid to admit it." And then, before her eyes, he tore the contract in half. Sophia gasped, tears finally streaming down. Alexander tore it again and again until the document was in pieces. Then he threw them into the fireplace. They both watched as the flames consumed the paper, transforming obligations into ashes. "You're free, Sophia." Alexander held her face with both hands. "Free from the contract. Free from me if you want. I won't hold you anymore, Alexander." But he interrupted, his voice breaking. "If you choose to stay, I don't want it to be out of obligation. I don't want it to be for the money or the baby. I want it to be because you love me, because you choose to love me." Sophia sobbed, grabbing his wrists. "You idiot." He blinked, surprised. "You think I'd stay here out of obligation?" She laughed through her tears. "You think I love you because I have no choice?" "Alexander, I love you despite all the reasons not to. I choose you every day. Always. Alexander closed his eyes, resting his forehead against hers. Marry me. We're already married. No, not that way. He pulled back, holding her hands. Marry me for real. Not by contract, not out of obligation, but because we want to, because we choose this. Sophia smiled, her heart so full it felt ready to burst. Yes, 1,000 times. Yes. Alexander pulled her into a kiss, deep, intense, full of promises and love. When they pulled apart, he knelt before her and placed his hands on her belly. And you, little one, he whispered to the baby, you're going to have a mother and father who truly love each other, who chose to be together. You promise I'll protect you, protect both of you always. The baby kicked as if in response. They both laughed, Sophia placing her hands over his. 2 weeks later, Alexander's father showed up at the penthouse. Edward Hawthorne was an imposing man with gray hair, an impeccable suit, and a stern expression. He entered as if he owned the place, because in many ways he thought he did. Alexander, he nodded, completely ignoring Sophia. We need to talk. Alexander, who was sitting next to Sophia on the couch, didn't move. What do you want, Dad? I heard you destroyed the contract. Edward crossed his arms, a foolish and emotional decision. Typical of someone who lets themselves be carried away by feelings. Be careful what you say. Alexander's voice was low, dangerous. Edward ignored him. That woman isn't suitable for you. She doesn't come from family, doesn't have the proper education, she has my heart. Alexander stood up, positioning himself between his father and Sophia, and that's all that matters. Heart? Edward laughed with disdain. You're being ridiculous. Send her away. Pay whatever is necessary. But end this before it damages the family reputation any further. No. Edward frowned. Excuse me? I said no. Alexander took a step forward, facing his father. You may have raised me. You may have molded me in your image for years, but now I'm a man. And this? He looked at Sophia with so much love she felt her chest tighten. This is my family. I'm your family. Edward shouted. The company. The Hawthorne legacy. You're wrong. Alexander shook his head. My family is her. It's the baby she's carrying. It's the home we're building together. And if you can't accept that, then maybe it's better if you leave. Edward turned pale. You're throwing me out. I'm giving you a choice. Alexander crossed his arms. You can accept Sophia and our child as part of this family and be welcome here, or you can continue being the bitter, controlling man you've always been and be alone. For a long moment, Edward just stared at his son. Then, without saying a word, he turned his back and left. The door closed behind him. Sophia stood up, walking to Alexander. She saw the pain in his eyes, but she also saw something more, relief. Are you okay? She asked softly. Yes, he hugged her. For the first time in my life, I'm truly okay. Say weeks later, Sophia went into labor. It was 12 hours of contractions, gasping breaths, clenched hands. Alexander was by her side every second, whispering words of encouragement, wiping the sweat from her forehead, saying, I love you, over and over. And then at 3:47 inches the morning on a rainy Tuesday, Liam Alexander Hawthorne came into the world, small, red, screaming loudly, perfect. The nurse placed the baby on Sophia's chest, and she looked at that wrinkled little face, those closed eyes, those tiny fingers, and felt a love so overwhelming she didn't know was possible. Alexander was beside her, tears flowing freely as he touched his son's little head for the first time. He's perfect, Alexander whispered, his voice thick. How you both are perfect. Sophia looked at him, at the man who had started as a cold, calculating stranger, and who was now there, vulnerable, crying, completely transformed by love. We did it, she said, smiling through her tears. Yes, Alexander kissed her forehead. Then the babies. We did it. 3 months later, in a small, intimate ceremony, Alexander and Sophia got married again. Not in a luxury ballroom, not in front of hundreds of guests, but in a simple garden with Sophia's father and sister as witnesses. With Liam in her arms, with vows written from the heart and not by lawyers, Alexander held her hands and said, I choose you not because I need to, but because I want to. Today, tomorrow, and every day to come. And Sophia responded, I choose you with all your flaws and all your qualities because you showed me that love isn't perfect, but it's real. They kissed under the afternoon sun with their son between them, with the future shining like a promise. Alexander Hawthorne, the man who only wanted an heir, discovered that he'd actually always wanted love, and Sophia Bennett, the woman who had sold her freedom, discovered that she'd actually found true liberation. Because love, when it's real, never imprisons. It sets you free. Years later, when Liam asked how Mommy and Daddy met, Sophia looked at Alexander with a smile. "It was complicated," she said, "but it was worth it." Alexander completed, kissing her, and it was every tear, every conflict, every moment of doubt, because in the end, they didn't just have a contract, they had a family. They had love, and that was all that really mattered. Alexander Hawthorne believed love was a weakness, something men like him couldn't afford to feel. He built walls around his heart, created contracts to control the uncontrollable, and thought he could have an heir without ever opening his soul. But Sophia Bennett, with her quiet strength and courageous heart, destroyed every one of those barriers. She taught him that love isn't weakness, it's the greatest courage of all. It's choosing someone every day, even when it hurts, even when it scares you. And in the end, Alexander discovered that what he really needed wasn't an heir. It was someone to love, someone to call home. Sometimes